Hi everyone, this is Longvo. Today is August the 21st, 2012. I'm analyzing one of my games in the Burlington Chess Club. I'm playing white, currently rated 1462. My opponent, Dominik Krajcovic, rated 1657. So I start off with e4. And he goes c5 with the Sicilian. I go knight to f3, and he goes knight to c6. I still don't know all my openings. Not very familiar with the Sicilian, but I guess I'm playing the open Sicilian here with d4, taking control of the center. So c takes d, knight takes d4, and he goes g6. I guess the idea here is to fianchetto the dark squared bishop here. So I defend my knight with c3 because I want to sort of block off the dark squared bishop, the diagonal here. And also I was hoping if he ever takes with the knight, then I can regain control of the center, and just to over defend the center here, because these two pieces are controlling a lot of key squares in the center. Bishop to g7 and bishop to e3. So here I'm careful not to block off the connection between the queen and the knight, because sometimes, right, if you blunder here, and then you might be down a piece. So I make sure I same thing, overprotecting the center, just simple development moves. I did want to get the bishop out of this diagonal so that I could eventually develop the knight there. So that's why I played that move. Perhaps I could have been a bit more aggressive, perhaps here, to try to perhaps induce him to make some pawn moves to kick my bishop out. But now I'm trying to be a little bit more positional and not get too crazy with the tactics until I have a stable center. So he goes a6. So I guess it's a prophylactic move, taking away the b5 square from my knight. I didn't really have the idea of going there, because the knight would sort of be alone, and I don't see any ways of creating concrete attacks, so I don't think that was a good move, unless he's planning to push eventually on the queen side. So I guess I don't know my opening, so maybe it is the main line. So now I keep developing with bishop to e2. Same thing, not too aggressive, not to c4, attacking the f7 square, and then he would like push or something like that, and just kick away the bishop and lose some tempo. So here on e2, I'm pretty flexible to either play on the queen side here or eventually play on the king side. So that's fine. And he goes e6. So opening the diagonal for the queen. So he's not really taking control of the center here, and I guess he doesn't want to block off the dark squared bishop either. So maybe he's thinking of pushing here eventually with d5. And I'm fine because this pawn here is not that strong at the moment, and moving the pawn up here would eventually perhaps weaken the king side here. So I want to keep my options open and not really let him know where I'm going to castle yet. So if he does push, for me it's just an easy thing to get rid of this pawn, and it would create an isolated queen pawn, which would become a weakness, and for me the pawns are a little bit more stable. So now I'm talking about positions and pawns and all that because I recently read up a bit on pawn structures, and it's just I'm trying something new. Instead of going for tactics, I just want to stabilize, have a good center, play a lot of moves back and forth, but not that many pawn moves, and try to induce him to move his pawns, and then obviously pawns can't go backwards. So once you create a weakness, then you start attacking. So now I go knight to d2. So at this point, obviously the pawn here is taking out, it's taking the c3 square for the knight, and the idea here is to move my knight towards the king side. I don't think he's gonna castle queen side because of the semi-open c file here. So with the Sicilian, I'm reluctant to castle queen side because of that semi-open file, and then it can get really with that dark squared bishop there, really dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. So I think he's gonna castle king side, so I'm sort of getting ready to meet him king side. So he goes knight to e7. So developing and taking care not to block off his dark squared bishop. And knight to f1. So that's kind of a strange looking move, but I'm not even done development, and I'm moving like my knight here a lot, but I don't see any threats right now. He's quite passive. Every piece is behind the 6th rank. It doesn't seem like he's gonna strike anytime soon. The center is quite stable, so I think I'm okay. Queen to c7. So same thing. I'm not sure. I don't understand the purpose of that move. Maybe it's prophylactic for to prevent my bishop from taking control there, or maybe he's threatening the h2 pawn eventually, and he's gonna launch some kingside attack. But I didn't really see the point of that move. So knight to g3. So up to date, my knight moved 1, 2, 3 squares in a row without even completing development, and that's something I would not normally do in the past. But like I said, I'm trying something new, and as you can see, I'm moving a lot of my minor pieces. Not that many pawn moves, because if I make a mistake, so what? You just go back, right? But pawns, you can't go back. So he goes d6. So same thing. Quite passive. I think it would have been okay for him to challenge the center at this point. So I don't know. The queen goes there, and then she gets blocked off. Or maybe he's planning something else on the dark square, but then I thought it was established that he doesn't want to block off the dark square bishop. So anyways, queen to d2, threatening to exchange here, because whenever I see this structure here with the fianchetto bishop, that dark square bishop is the only piece defending the dark squares around the king if he does castle that way. And it sort of gives my king the option of castling either side. So he hasn't castled yet. He's not really threatening any attacks. So right now I'm not too pressed to finish development, and right now it's just sort of focusing a lot of my minor pieces towards where I think he's gonna castle. And plus, by playing queen here to d2, it's sort of hinting that I'm gonna launch an attack here, and it worked. It caused him to go h6, which works out for me because now he's weakening the light square around the king if he decides to castle. So now I'm thinking in my head, maybe I should later on go to c4, putting pressure on that f7 pawn if he does castle, and then this pawn here becomes a target if I can somehow manage to open up the center and then pin the f7 pawn. So knight to f3. The idea here is to open the d file. So I was thinking of eventually moving my rook here or castling kingside and putting pressure on this pawn because it's a backwards pawn now. It's quite weak. Right, so there's no immediate way for him to defend it. So if the next move I play rook to d1, there's no real way for him to defend that pawn right away. The bishop here is blocking the knight from defending. I guess he could go here, but then exchanging that would not be good. But it's not really a real threat here. It's just I wanted to also move my minor pieces towards the king side. Just going back and forth, try to induce some moves, and same thing, it worked. So he goes g5. So at this point here, I didn't think he would castle kingside anymore because it's quite weak now. So maybe he thinks I'm gonna castle kingside, and he's trying to start pushing pawns and opening up the king side. And because that knight is there, so these three pieces are quite vulnerable to forks by pawns, right? So maybe that's what he's thinking. When he played that move, I was really happy because you know, in my mind, that king is staying in the middle. So so that's where I'm kind of happy with this semi-open d file. That's not the move I played. Okay, so now I play knight to g5, and same thing. Once you move that pawn there, the light squares are super weak around it. The light square bishop is nowhere near the action. So the knight here is, you might as well say that's an outpost, and it doesn't even need a pawn to protect it. There's nobody that can kick out that knight, so it's quite powerful there. And the bishop is pretty much trapped. Can't go here because of the knight, here because of the other knight, or if he stays there, he can get taken. And if he retreats to f8, just preventing the king from castling and sort of going backwards with development. So I think that's a good move. Then he castles kingside, which kind of surprised me because I wouldn't have castled if the king side was that weak, right? So I contemplated here, you know, how to continue. Obviously, one of the moves could be to simply take. Another possibility was to start going after that pawn right away, and if he defends, yeah, and that's my reasoning not to go ahead with attacking the center or anything like that. The other option was perhaps moving the bishop here to x-ray the h7 square, and then eventually make a push for just to open up some diagonals. So I had some options here. I decided though to so knight takes g7 instead, because I felt that even though my knight was stronger than his bishop at this point, the bishop is the only defensive piece around the king. So the rook here is actually blocking off the king from any escape. The knight here is the only other defender that's here. The rest, the other four pieces are just out of the game. So king takes g7. So now I go h4. So now I'm committed to opening up the h file. I was hoping he would advance, and then once I retreat the knight here, it just opens up for the bishop. So he goes f6, defending the g5 pawn. So same thing. I'm really glad that he's starting to push his pawns up there. No light square bishop around to defend the light squares. So many ways to penetrate the defense. Okay, so so now h takes g5, and to my surprise he goes h takes g. So obviously now he's opening up the h file. I was thinking maybe he would want to exchange rooks eventually, but then why did he move this pawn if he was gonna take with the other one, right? So he could have, well, anyways, it's still needed now because I can still attack, but quite overextended on the king side here. So I castle king side, queen side, and I'm, still scared of that semi-open file. So now if he develops the bishop and he can somehow move the knight out of the way and launch like a mini threat here. I felt confident that I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more active pieces on an open king than he has on my king that's more or less protected. So I was okay with castling queenside, and now it would be a race towards the king, and obviously I have a huge head start. So he goes knight to e5. So I don't know if he's offering to exchange, which I don't think would be good for me, because I think I have a better position, and I need that knight to create some threats, and once that king is open like that, if the knight can somehow find an outpost somewhere here, or like do like a fork, so the knight here is important to me. So I go rook to h3. So obviously I didn't want to take the knight, but if he took, that would also work out for me, because then I would simply take, and then now the bishop here is quite open instead of wasting moves moving the knight. So I was okay with letting him take, and the goal is I want the knight out of there so I can eventually push for f4 to open the king side even more. But I decided to go rook to h3 because now I have the option of doubling rooks or to x-ray the king. And I did think this may have been a mistake because there was this move here, but then looking back it's fine, because if he did play g4, I would simply x-ray the pin that g pawn, and he can't take because of the pin. So that would have worked out for me, and then later on all I have to do is perhaps move the knight here to attack the pawn, triple attack, and there's no way he would defend, and then his king would totally be open. So maybe it wasn't a mistake. So now he retreats the knight to f7, which I think is okay. It makes sense. He's reorganizing himself for defense here. So I'm also happy with that, and my next idea is to move the knight out of the way, perhaps here, then to push to open up the king side. So now rook to g3, still x-raying that king, and then I still have the option to play here. And before that move, when the knight went here, the pawn was hanging. So at this point, this pawn was hanging, so I could have taken it, but then that would be a mistake, I think, because that would just release a lot of pressure from the king side, because if pieces start coming off the board, like the queens are off the board now, and if we make any more exchanges and we go to an endgame, basically his open king is the more active king, so he would have an advantage, and his pawns here are connected, so it's not like I have a huge advantage here, and this pawn advantage, I don't think it's gonna make a huge difference, and there's still chances for him to draw. So now his next move is knight to g6. So I think the queen here is now slowly getting back into the defense, and the knight here is sort of covering some of the important squares here around the king. So he's slowly defending, right? So what's my next move? Same thing. I want to open up the king side over here. So knight to d4. So the knight here is not really threatening anything. This is an empty threat. It would simply help him to develop. The knight is quite vulnerable to attacks, and if he attacks a knight with tempo, then opening up the light squared bishop. But it is also tempting him to advance, because then if he does, I see this nice outpost there, and I do want him to exchange. So once this pawn is here, it's quite annoying for the knights. Basically that pawn is on an outpost of its own. Nothing can kick it out. And it's just a pawn, and it's a very powerful pawn in this state, because it's really restricting this important square that may be used for the bishop, right? So so the knight there is putting pressure indirectly. So he goes bishop to d7, I guess, perhaps connecting the rooks and maybe trying to launch a counter attack here. I think it's way too late without the dark squared bishop here. That's another reason I took that knight, the bishop with my knight back then, because that fianchetto bishop is not only a good defensive piece, but it's quite aggressive with that diagonal there. So my next move is f4, just as I planned. So if he takes, that works out for me. I would take back, and that knight is pinned, so he can't take back. Well, let's just do it. So if he takes, I take. The knight can't take because of the pin. And now both diagonals are totally open. The rook has an open file there. You know, I can bring the other rook into the attack. The queen is well placed, defending the bishop. And it's just a really bad position if he was to take. If he advances, same problem. That pawn there is just unprotected, and then it just leads to more tactics with that X-ray. So, well, he did take. So G takes F, and bishop takes f4. It does give him the option to pin the knight and the bishop, so I knew that. So he goes e5, and so at this point the knight here is not that important. The important thing was to get rid of the that pawn opening the g file. So this gave me a great move here with bishop to h5, pinning the knight. So that knight will fall. There's nothing that can defend it. The bishop can't go back to defend. He can take whatever he wants, but once I take with the rook, he's in big trouble. So so he goes e takes f4, threatening the rook. Rook takes e6 check. King goes to h7. So I guess that was the right move. He needed the king to stay connected to that rook so that it would neutralize both of my pieces here. So at this point I had some options. One was to x-ray the king with h1, but then I thought that this doesn't really help, because as long as the king is there and the bishop is protecting this rook here, if I make a discovered attack, it would simply take the other rook, and there's no way to really move unless I find another defender, but that's gonna take a couple of moves, right? So I didn't go that route. The other route was to take with the queen. So queen takes f4. So I felt that at this point the queen has bettered her position, and the rook can always come over, and maybe there may be some other threats of exchanging the light square bishop to bring in the pawn, and that king is just too open, and the queen, the other rooks, the bishop are really out of the game. The knight is the only defender. The rooks are connected, so maybe there's something he can do, but his king is quite cramped in here, and if he brings in the rooks, it simply cuts off escape square. So at this point, he simply resigned, and so I was really happy with this game. I don't think I played super well. I think I'm lucky he made a couple of errors, overextending his pawn. So, but my strategy of playing more positional versus tactical worked. And plus, it's quite a tactical game at this point. So having a good, strong position does lead to very interesting tactics that you can maintain, right? So I hope you guys learned something, and we'll see you next time. Bye.